Hi students, this is Dina Bonneke, and I'm back with you for the third and final movie about communication disorders in children. To start things off, I want to talk about apraxia and central auditory processing disorder, two other types of speech and language disorders. These two don't fit as neatly into the previous set of language disorders you learned about. Apraxia is considered a speech disorder, and central auditory processing disorder is considered a language disorder. Let's start with apraxia. Sometimes it's called childhood apraxia of speech, or verbal apraxia, developmental apraxia of speech, or verbal dyspraxia. No matter what the term is, the most important concept is the root word praxis. Praxis means planned movement. A child with the diagnosis of apraxia has difficulty programming and planning speech movements. For reasons not yet fully understood, children with apraxia of speech have great difficulty planning and producing the series of movements of the tongue, lips, jaw, and palate that are necessary for intelligible speech. This is not because of muscle weakness or paralysis. It's because the brain has trouble figuring out how to move the body parts or how to plan the coordination of movements of the lips, jaw, tongue, and so forth that are needed for speech. The child knows what he or she wants to say, but the brain has difficulty coordinating the muscle movements necessary to say those words. Apraxia is not disfluency. It's not a problem with articulation. In apraxia, the words and sentences are in the brain, they just don't come out. It's as if someone knows what they want to say, but almost like a person with cerebral palsy who's trying to make a motor movement and can't make a fluid movement, they just can't say it correctly. People with apraxia have a difficult time planning their speech. Again, in this condition, the mind cannot get the words out, even though the mouth is more than capable of physically producing the sounds and words. It's like there's a short circuit between the brain and the mouth. Some children have very severe forms of apraxia, causing them to have little speech. Others, for example, might be asked to say the word tornado and will repeat it as tornado, then tornado, etc., with different productions each time. Auditory processing disorder, also called central auditory processing disorder, is an umbrella term for a variety of disorders that affect the way the brain processes sound and auditory information. It's not a hearing problem or a problem with the ear in any way. The problem is in the brain or in the nervous system. Individuals with auditory processing disorder have normal hearing, but they cannot efficiently process information they hear in the same way that other people do, which leads to difficulties in recognizing and interpreting sounds, especially the sounds that compose speech. Auditory processing disorder is a language disorder, but it is not aligned to the form, content, and function of language that I mentioned in the last movie. In other words, this language disorder is not specifically related to phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, or pragmatics. You need to be aware that there is some controversy about central auditory processing disorder. There's not an agreed upon tool or measure to diagnose it. Don't get me wrong, many people believe that central auditory processing disorder is a real disability and children who have it experience difficulty processing auditory information, but the distinction between finding something that's heard to be confusing and actually having a disability that says one cannot process auditory information correctly is a very hard distinction to make. If I'm sitting in a lecture in a physics class and I can't follow the professor's teaching, does that mean that I have a central auditory processing disorder, or does that mean I'm just confused because I don't have sufficient background knowledge on the content? Some people believe that too many diagnoses are made and that criteria to diagnose this disability in particular are too fuzzy and therefore cause some of the diagnoses to be made in error or meaningless. The final area I'm going to talk to you about in this movie is augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC for short. The book doesn't provide a whole lot of information about AAC, so I'm going to try to highlight some important information for you. Now, the first word in AAC is augmentative. Augmentative communication denotes techniques that supplement or enhance communication by complementing whatever communication skills the child already has. The second word in AAC is alternative. Alternative refers to techniques used by individuals in place of speech. AAC is often used with people who are nonverbal or minimally verbal, meaning that they communicate using little or no speech. Take a look at this video. It's a little older and some of the language seems a little offensive, for example, the bumper stickers, but those were apparently chosen by that person with disabilities and they have the freedom of speech too. Pay attention to all the different ways people are communicating using AAC in the video. The last half of the video is devoted to using high-tech devices.
Communication matters. Augmentative and alternative communication strategies are designed to make the best possible use of an individual's inherent abilities, to compensate for their individual difficulties, and thereby to make their communication as quick, simple, and effective as possible. AAC covers a wide variety of systems and techniques, ranging from signing, gesture or facial expression through pictures and symbol charts, right up to high-tech aided solutions using sophisticated computer technology.
People who are using AAC at the moment are people with cerebral palsy, children and adults, people with a learning disability, people who've had strokes, people on the autistic spectrum, people with illnesses such as motor neuron disease or Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis, people with head injuries. Some people at the early stages of dementia may well benefit from using some AAC type strategies.
We've been aware of communication problems with patients for many years, in fact as long as intensive care has been around, but it's only in the last few years that we've started to notice it getting harder because our patients are more awake now. We try to get people better faster, and it means that very often patients are awake with a tube in their mouth, unable to speak, just at the point in their life where they really want to say something.
If you consider that a sophisticated communication machine might have 2,000 or 3,000 phrases, bits of phrase in it, you've somehow got to pull together a sentence using any one of those phrases or bits of phrase. It takes a lot of learning to do that.
When you meet somebody with a communication difficulty, you can often think that the person is not very intelligent. We judge people on how they talk, how they interact with ourselves. However, as soon as you give somebody a communication aid and give them sufficient support and training to learn how to use that communication aid, you can quite often find that the person has lots to say.
Hi, my name is Toby Hewson. I'm 24 and live independently with a team of personal support assistants. I lead a very busy life, involved with many organizations to do with AAC. I was diagnosed at the age of 12 months with cerebral palsy, and with a great support from my parents, teachers and therapists, I eventually ended up 6 years ago with a high-tech AAC machine. I am now trustee of Communication Matters, a trustee and role model for One Voice, who set up networking and fun weekends for children who use AAC, their parents and, as importantly, their siblings. I speak at conferences and visit schools and colleges where I show a video that I made. This, I hope, will overcome barriers that people have who lack the experience of someone using AAC.
Are people ever nasty to you because of your disabilities?
I ignore them. I would not be able to do any of these things without my AAC machine. And I should know, I was 18 before I could have my first conversation with my mom and dad.
Do you like computers?
I love computers.
Been friends with Katie for I think about 8 years now. We met at school, and our relationship really wouldn't be a relationship if she didn't have a communication aid. She can use simple sign language to communicate as well, but we couldn't have our girly chats if she didn't have a communication aid.
This life of mine is fabulous. Not only do I study at university, I am involved with an inclusive theater company at staff level, I volunteer with a national organization, and I even manage to write a column in a national monthly newspaper. Also, I am well known for giving speeches and talks. None of this would happen if I was not given a communication aid. We are denied communication aids. Quite simply, we are denied the chance to be human. At communication aids have the power to make the lives of people like me not only worth living, but useful, easy and wonderful in parts.
Katie couldn't be at university if she didn't have a communication aid. It's quite simple. If she didn't have a communication aid, then she would not be able to communicate her complex thoughts, and she would not be able to demonstrate that she knows stuff and that information actually goes in.
My name's Alan Martin. I live in Morgan on the Whirl. I am a dance workshop leader, and I give performances, write my own music, and also I give disability issues presentations. What I do is not wheelchair dancing, it is creative contemporary dance. There is a very big difference. Most of what I've achieved in the last 10 years would not have been possible without an electronic communication aid. I believe that everyone can dance. We may dance differently, but it is still dance. I've decided to try working as self-employed to earn my living. I've given up most of my welfare benefits.
Hi, my name is Toby Churchill. I lost speech and most movement at age 21. I was at Bath University studying engineering when I was taken ill with viral encephalitis. After 1 year I returned home. My means of communication was an IBM typewriter. This was fine indoors, but not portable. My social life was limited. So I set to work designing a battery-operated typewriter with speech output and dual displays. To my surprise, there was a market for my invention. Here we are 30 years later, sitting in our factory of 30 people. We export worldwide. My communication aid allows me and thousands like me to live independently, giving us control of our lives. Thank you, and I must be in Los Angeles now.
Is that this technology is integrated so that when someone comes in for a communication aids assessment or a power chair assessment or an environmental control assessment, the person dealing with that person taking on that referral would actually look at all of that area of assistive technology as if they provided it all in-house, in one house. Communication aids are coming out now with English-sounding voices and voices with regional dialects in. The other exciting area is the way the communication aids can communicate themselves to other pieces of technology. They already have built-in environmental control features in them. They have Bluetooth attached to them so that they can control printers and all sorts of other things.
No one would bully me because I am the type of person who speaks up and never shuts up, and also all my friends would go after them.
Now let's talk about the two main types of AAC, which are aided and unaided communication. You'll be seeing this slide again later. When we talk about AAC, we often refer to communication that is aided or unaided. Unaided communication may include things like gestures, body language, sign language, facial expression, etc., because you don't need an object to help you communicate messages. Aided communication requires some sort of physical thing that helps you communicate. Aided communication can include paper and pencil, communication books or boards that use unchanging or static symbols, devices that have pictures and produce voice output, also known as speech-generating devices, or text-to-speech output. Some electronic communication aids allow the user to use picture symbols, letters, and/or words and phrases to create messages. Most of these things can be set up to be very simple, like one button to activate one message, or very complex, like multiple buttons on a communication device that lead to other pages and multiple other messages. The recent development in AAC has been using iPads with communication apps, as they are more cost-effective than many of the communication devices available. The downside is there's not much tech support, you have to program them by yourself exclusively, and they're not even close to indestructible. So the pictures you've seen on this slide of AAC devices are examples of some of the many aided communication devices available. If you're going to set up a communication chart, a communication board, or something where the child has a piece of electronic equipment to communicate, you are adding an aided aspect to their communication. In contrast, unaided communication techniques do not require any additional physical object or device. Whatever residual speech or communication ability a child has can be used. If you can teach a child some manual signs or gestures, use whatever facial expression they have, or teach them to answer yes/no in a specific way using their voice or body, these are all unaided components of an AAC communication system. A woman I work with has a very reliable yes/no response, although she has very significant motor problems. She has cerebral palsy and has limited use of her voice, arms, and legs, but with her head and her eyes she can indicate yes and no very clearly. Everyone knows what her yes is because she looks up, and everyone knows what her no is because she puts her head down. As for her, this is the most efficient way to communicate yes and no, rather than provide her with a head pointer for a communication board or some sort of communication device where she has to activate an icon for yes and no, or just hit a switch for yes and no. This story is a good example of the importance of building on the communication skills a person has. It's a huge mistake to ever take away someone's communication skills by disregarding their current skills. A functional, useful communication system is best established by building on the skills a person brings with them. So the more unaided components a person has, usually the better, because the child has more options for natural ways of communicating. Sometimes the unaided components are idiosyncratic to the individual, and by that I mean that they're very individualized. For example, I know people that use sign language signs that are homemade. In other words, they resemble sign language, but they're not exactly sign language. Of course, if you can teach someone to use aided components, that's great too. Again, the whole goal of AAC is to expand communication options for a child as much as possible. We can actually divide aided communication into two categories, non-electronic and electronic. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. Non-electronic aids are fairly static or unchanging. We can make pictures for the student to put on their schedule, point to, etc. It can be time-consuming to make all of the pictures and visuals, but they are portable and they never break down. And if they do get destroyed, hopefully you saved a copy and can just print new ones. Communication with this type of system can be limiting for some students, as you may not always have every picture you want available when you need it. Electronic aids have a lot of advantages, and most of them are icon or picture-based. When you hear the word icon, that means pictures, so the child does not have to be a reader to make a selection, but rather points to a picture. However, if this technology breaks down, and it does, and has to be sent in for repairs, the student is back to their limited communication. Simple electronic AAC devices include a series of switches, the simplest one being a one-button switch and continuing up to devices with many buttons. An example of a switch is like the big red or green button looking thing that you saw on the recent slide with the pictures of the communication devices. These switches can record your voice for expressing messages, as well as activate switch-operated toys and devices like blenders and fans, etc. Most electronic AAC devices that are digital include a series of screens or windows that make communication very efficient. They're often more computer-based. Imagine how you click on an icon on your computer desktop that opens up another page, and then you can open up other pages from there, etc. It's like that. As mentioned earlier, iPad types of technology are popular right now. In the future, we may see more people using software for common everyday technologies such as iPads or any other type of tablet computer. Communicating in this way offers more opportunities for more messages because digital devices have much more memory capability, and every icon can be linked to a new icon with new messages. Even though electronic aids have a lot of potential, teachers don't want to discount non-electronic aids because they have advantages too. Non-electronic aids include communication boards, charts, books, etc., where the child is usually pointing to pictures or words. It is always good to have a backup of non-electronic visuals that are the same pictures used in the child's electronic device in case the electronic device breaks. This way, you can try to assist them in communicating while their device is repaired, as well as having the entire list of messages that were used on the device in case a new device is needed or something happens to all of the messages on the broken device. Electronic aids can have synthesized speech, which used to sound like a robot and wasn't very good, but it's gotten a lot better now and is actually quite good. I want to repeat something I said earlier. It's really important to understand that with AAC systems, we never want to take any communication away from the child that they have, just enhance what they already have. For example, if the child was able to efficiently communicate eye gaze, we might not try to teach them sign language. Instead, we might get them a communication device that could be activated using eye gaze. In addition to assisting them to access the curriculum in class, students can increase their ability to make choices, answer yes/no questions, choose multiple choice answers, provide information, comment, read recorded stories or paragraphs that will allow them to read aloud, greet and socialize with staff typically developing, peers and peers with disabilities, make requests, etc. When you have a good system in place, it needs to be available to them as often as possible, as it will become their voice and their way to access their environment. So don't forget to take it out of their book bag when they get to school. AAC systems should be multimodal and possess as many ways to communicate as possible. The key to establishing and supporting an AAC system is to enable the communicator and communicative partners to exchange the greatest possible range of information in the most effective and efficient manner. And one last thing, parents are often nervous about communication devices and how they will impact their child's speech. You can tell them that Millar, Light, and Schlosser from their research in 2006 found that using AAC does not discourage speech production. Its use has actually been shown to improve the development of speech, if the student is physically able, and language. And there are many other studies out there to support it. So that's it for this movie. There's lots of YouTube videos out there that show individuals receiving all types of speech therapy. Check out some if you have time. That's it for me. I hope you've learned some useful information about speech, language, and AAC. Good luck and be great.